Okay, so this is chapter number 24, supply side policies, unit number 5, government intervention at macroeconomic level. So this video is for AS economics, and supply side policies. First of all, we will define what supply side policies are, and then we will look into the different tools or instruments that are used by the supply side policy to achieve multiple macroeconomic objectives, and at the end we will look into the effectiveness or problems that make basically supply side policy ineffective. So we will discuss that or evaluate that as well. So first of all, if we define supply side policy, then supply side policies include the government policies that are used to increase aggregate supply for the purpose of achieving multiple macroeconomic objectives. And multiple macroeconomic objectives include like economic growth, controlling inflation, controlling unemployment, and correcting deficit balance of payments. So these are the major government objectives. So supply side policy is used to achieve these objectives. So now moving to the description of supply side policy. When supply side policy is effective, it increases aggregate supply in the economy, and when aggregate supply increases, it achieves multiple macroeconomic objectives. So you can look into this graph. We have like real GDP on X, real GDP on X-axis, and on Y we have price level. This is price level, and aggregate demand curve is negatively sloped like this, and aggregate supply curve is positively sloped, and equilibrium in macroeconomy takes place at point E, where the price level is P and real GDP is Y. Now if there is increase in aggregate supply, then aggregate supply curve shifts to the right, so it will move from AS to AS1, and as a result new equilibrium will move to E1, where real GDP will rise to Y1 and price level will fall to P1. So when government uses supply side policy, if it is effective, then it will increase aggregate supply in the economy, and as a result price level falls, and whenever price level falls, inflation is controlled. And we can also see that there is a rise in real GDP. When real GDP increases, it causes economic growth in the country. And similarly, when aggregate supply is increasing, it means more production is taking place in the country, and it will require more workers to be employed, so employment also increases. And the next objective is like correcting deficit balance of payment. Then when we are producing more and supplying more goods and services in the economy, then it will definitely increase overall output and availability of goods within the economy, and we will also be in the position to export greater quantity of goods and services to the other countries. So as a result, we will export more and import less, and balance of payment deficit will be corrected. Okay, so now moving to the tools of like supply side policy. So what are the tools or instruments or methods of supply side policy? So let's have a look on them. So multiple tools that supply side policy uses are listed here. So these are the tools or instruments or methods of supply side policy. The first tool is provision of subsidy or reduction in indirect taxes. When government wants to increase aggregate supply in the country, government will provide more subsidy to the private sector. Subsidy is the financial support which is provided by the government to the private sector, so that private sector produces greater quantity of goods and services. And when greater output is produced, then it leads to achieving economic growth and increasing employment in the country at relatively low prices. And the next thing is education and training of workers. So governments generally spend a lot of funds for educating and training workers to make them more efficient, productive, so that they produce greater output, and definitely it will lead to greater availability of import substitutes within the country, and the country will also be able to export goods to the other countries as well. So when we do that, balance of payment will also be corrected, and these workers who get education and training will be able to get employment, so unemployment will also be controlled. And when workers are more productive, overall output increases, aggregate supply increases, and price level is also controlled. As you have seen in the previous figure as well, when aggregate supply increases, the reason may be like education and training of workers or provision of subsidy or any other reason that are mentioned here. And increasing capital expenditure. Capital expenditure are the government expenditure that are done on long-term projects like construction of motorways, roads, bridges, ports, seaports, and definitely educational institutions, schools, colleges, universities, hospitals. So all of these expenditure are called capital expenditure. So capital expenditure on long-term projects also increases economic activity in the country, increases employment opportunities, so unemployment will also be controlled. And the next thing is like trade union reforms. Trade unions are the association of workers that work for the benefits of its member workers, right? So generally what trade unions do, they call strikes and interrupt production process, and the flow production is interrupted, and as a result overall production and supply will be low in the country if trade unions are like forcing the production process to stop. But when government makes reforms, makes rules and regulations for these trade unions, then it means trade unions will stop making like undergoing kind of strikes, and the flow production will take place in the country, and as a result more output will be produced and greater employment opportunities will be created and economic growth will also rise. Deregulation of monopoly is another thing that generally supply side policy looks for. Deregulation is when government deregisters or deregulates monopoly firms. Monopoly is basically the kind of firm that has dominated the entire industry, like Wabda in Pakistan, that is the electricity seller in Pakistan. It is the only company that sells electricity in Pakistan. So it is a monopoly position. So if government like deregulates monopoly position of a certain firm, then new firms will enter the industry, and as a result overall output of the country will increase. Privatization is also connected with deregulation. If sometimes monopolies are under the government, then government may privatize them, and when government institutions are sold to the private sector, then such selling of government firms to the private sector is known as privatization. And privatization also leads to greater number of firms entering the industry. When more firms enter the industry, definitely overall output of the country increases, more jobs are created, and unemployment is controlled, and prices are also controlled, because when there is privatization there will be competition among so many sellers, and as a result prices will also decrease. Now moving to the evaluation part, like when you evaluate the policy you have to talk against the policy, right? So one by one we can look into these tools once again. So when government provides subsidy to the private sector, it is not always beneficial to the economy to achieve multiple macroeconomic objectives. Rather, subsidy may fail to achieve the objectives. Like subsidy failure, when like government provides subsidy to the private sector may be basically reluctant to get efficient and increase productivity of workers and stuff like that. So because they think that they are compensated by the government in the form of subsidy, so they need not to be efficient. So all the funds that are allocated by the government may be wasted. And a real-time example can be like government of the USA generally gives a lot of subsidy to the farmers so that they produce greater agricultural goods, greater quantity of agricultural goods to satisfy needs of the society. But in many cases this subsidy is misused by the farmers, and it does not lead to increase in productivity and efficiency. So it fails to achieve macroeconomic objectives. Provision of education and training. When government provides education and training to the workers at its own cost, workers may take it for granted, and when they take it for granted, they don't learn new skills, and when they don't learn new skills, their efficiency and productivity will not rise, output may not rise, and unemployment may not be controlled. So this is again like the drawback of subsidy of education and training provided by the government. So it may fail the basically policy. And increasing capital expenditure is another method, and sometimes capital expenditure done by the government on long-term projects are just for the sake of getting or gaining political gain, and it might not increase employment and achieve economic growth. And similarly, capital expenditure have the sequencing issue as well. Sometimes government does not take care of the sequence of the process to be followed. For example, government decided to construct the road. Once the road has been constructed, then government basically realized that they have to basically install water pipelines. Then again they will distort everything that they did already. So all the investments that were done to build the infrastructure road will be wasted, right? So other like policies can also be evaluated in the same way. You have to talk against them why they cannot achieve multiple macroeconomic objectives. So this is the complete chapter that explains what supply side policy is, and if supply side policy is effective, then what will happen to the aggregate supply, what will happen to the price level, what will happen to the real GDP of the country, and why these policies fail to achieve these objectives. And this was really a shorter and smaller topic and chapter, so I believe you understand that. If there is any ambiguity, then you may write in the comment box, so I'll get back to you as early as possible. Now I'm going to give a quick review in Urdu and Hindi as well. So if any one of you could not understand the concept in true sense, then definitely you will also be able to understand it. ये जो चैप्टर है 24 सप्लाई साइड पॉलिसी का, सप्लाई साइड पॉलिसी सबसे पहले अगर हम डिफाइन करें इज़ द पॉलिसी ऑफ द गवर्नमेंट दैट इंक्रीजेज एग्रीगेट सप्लाई इन द कंट्री. सो एग्रीगेट सप्लाई जब बढ़ती है तो राइट को शिफ्ट हो जाती है, इक्विलिब्रियम ई से E1 पे आ जाता है, प्राइस लेवल P से P1 पे आ जाता है, रियल जीडीपी इंक्रीज़ कर जाता है Y से Y1 तक. जब जीडीपी बढ़ता है इसे हम ग्रोथ का नाम देते हैं, और जब प्राइस कम होती है तो इससे इन्फ्लेशन कम हो जाती है. उसके बाद आई डिस्कस्ड के क्या सप्लाई साइड के पॉलिसी के टूल्स क्या होते हैं. लाइक गवर्नमेंट प्राइवेट सेक्टर को सब्सिडी देती है जो कि हेल्प होती है, फाइनेंशियल सपोर्ट होती है, उससे प्राइवेट सेक्टर ज़्यादा प्रोडक्शन करता है, ज़्यादा आउटपुट बनेगा, ज़्यादा एम्प्लॉयमेंट होगी, ग्रोथ भी अचीव होगी, प्राइसेस भी कंट्रोल हो जाती हैं. फिर इसी सेम पॉइंट को जब हमने इवेल्यूएट किया तो प्राइवेट सेक्टर जनरली सब्सिडी का मिस यूज़ करता है. मिस यूज़ करेगा तो ज़ाहिर फिर ये ऑब्जेक्टिव अचीव नहीं हो पाता. एजुकेशन एंड ट्रेनिंग ऑफ वर्कर्स, ये गवर्नमेंट की पॉलिसी होती है. गवर्नमेंट इटसेल्फ अपनी कॉस्ट पे प्राइवेट सेक्टर को जो बेसिकली एम्प्लॉयज़ हैं, वर्कर्स हैं, उनको गवर्नमेंट एजुकेट एंड ट्रेन करती है ताकि ये लोग ज़्यादा एफिशिएंट और प्रोडक्टिव हों, आउटपुट बढ़ाने में हेल्प कर सकें. इसकी इवैल्यूएशन ये है कि जब गवर्नमेंट अपनी कॉस्ट पे लोगों को एजुकेशन एंड ट्रेनिंग प्रोवाइड करती है तो बहुत दफ़ा ये होता है कि ऑल द फंड्स दैट आर बेसिकली एलोकेटेड फॉर एजुकेशन एंड ट्रेनिंग आर वेस्टेड, और इसकी अपॉर्चुनिटी कॉस्ट भी होती है. एजुकेशन एंड ट्रेनिंग की बजाय में भी कुछ और ज़्यादा ज़रूरी होता जो गवर्नमेंट ने कॉम्प्रोमाइज़ कर दिया. इसी तरह से बहुत दफ़ा ये होता है कि लोग एजुकेशन एंड ट्रेनिंग लेके दे माइग्रेट टू अदर कंट्री, सो एज अ रिज़ल्ट आपके कंट्री को उन लोगों का कोई फ़ायदा नहीं होता. कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर लॉन्ग टर्म प्रोजेक्ट्स पे होते हैं, जैसे गवर्नमेंट रोड्स बनाती है, ब्रिजेस बनाती है, स्कूल्स कॉलेजेस बनाती है, उससे एम्प्लॉयमेंट भी क्रिएट होती है, आउटपुट भी बढ़ता है. लेकिन कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर भी हर दफ़ा इफ़ेक्टिव नहीं होते. कई दफ़ा पॉलिटिकल गेन के लिए गवर्नमेंट्स खर्चे कर रही होते हैं. सीक्वेंसिंग इशू होता है, जैसे मैंने रोड की एग्जांपल दी. गवर्नमेंट ने रोड बनाई, रोड बन गई, उसके बाद याद आया कि यहाँ पे वाटर पाइपलाइन भी बिछानी थी. सो अब जब वाटर पाइपलाइन बिछाएंगे तो ज़ाहिर दोबारा से आपको سارا روڈ جو ہے اسے توڑنا پڑے گا. سو آل دا منی از ویسٹڈ اگین. اینڈ دین ٹریڈ یونینز ورکرز کی ایسوسیشنز کو کہتے ہیں جو کہ ورکرز کے بینیفٹس کے لیے اسٹرائکس کال کرتی ہیں, پروڈکشن کو انٹرپٹ کرتی ہیں. جب ان کے لیے گورنمنٹ ریفارمز کرے گی, ریفارمز کا مطلب ہے کہ گورنمنٹ ان کے لیے رولز ریگولیشنز بنائے گی تاکہ وہ اسٹرائکس نہ کریں, آؤٹ پٹ پروڈکشن زیادہ ہو, جی ڈی پی بڑھے گا, گروتھ ہوگی. ڈی ریگولیشن آف مونوپلی کا مطلب ہے کہ مونوپلی فرمز کو گورنمنٹ ڈی ریگولیٹ کر دیتی ہے, ڈی رجسٹر کر دیتی ہے تاکہ نئی فرمز بھی مارکیٹ میں آ سکیں. پرائیویٹائزیشن بھی اسی کے ساتھ کنیکٹڈ ہے کہ گورنمنٹ اپنے انسٹیٹیوشنز کو سیل کر دیتی ہے پرائیویٹ لوگوں کو. سو ایز اے ریزلٹ پرائیویٹ لوگ جب زیادہ پروڈکشن پروسیس میں انوالو ہوں گے تو آؤٹ پٹ پھر کنٹری میں انکریز ہوگا, اکنامک گروتھ اچیو ہوگی اور امپلائمنٹ بھی کریٹ ہوگی. ٹھیک ہے, سو دس از اٹ فار ٹوڈیز لیسن اینڈ سی یو ود دا نیکسٹ ویڈیو سون. اللہ حافظ.